I opened the doors to my bakery with trembling hands, the scent of fresh bread and vanilla frosting wrapping around me like a dream I had been chasing for years. For months, I'd worked through sleepless nights, burning through savings, pouring every ounce of myself into turning an empty storefront into a place that felt like magic. I imagined this day over and over, ribbons at the door, my family sitting in the front row, proud smiles, cameras flashing as I cut the ribbon to the bakery of my dreams. I had even saved the first slice of cake for my mother because she always told me I was wasting my time baking when I could get a real job. But I thought, if she tasted this, if she saw the line of people waiting to try my pastries, maybe she'd finally understand me. I thought if my sister saw the chandelier I chose, or the soft blush curtains I hung by the window, she'd realize that I wasn't some childish dreamer anymore. I was building something real. I stood by the entrance in my best dress, rehearsing the words I'd say to them when they walked in. Thank you for believing in me. Only they never walked in. The crowd arrived, strangers filling every seat, their voices echoing with laughter and excitement. I searched every face, convinced I'd spot them running late, but as the minutes stretched into hours, the truth sank in heavier than any disappointment I'd known before. My family didn't come, not a single one of them. And as I stood there, smiling for photos, handing out pastries, pretending everything was perfect, a quiet storm began to form inside me. Because this wasn't just about a bakery. This was about every time they dismissed me, every time they rolled their eyes, every time they told me I would fail. And as the lights glowed on my dream without them there to witness it, I made a decision that would change everything. I stayed up that night long after the last guest had left, the bakery floor still dusted with powdered sugar and stray sprinkles, the air thick with the sweetness of frosting and exhaustion. My hands were raw from tying bows and carrying trays, but it was my heart that felt the heaviest. I sat at one of the polished wooden tables I had sanded myself, staring at the empty seats that should have been filled with my family. I imagined their excuses. My sister claiming she was too busy, my mother saying she didn't feel well, my father shrugging like it wasn't important. They always had excuses, but the truth was simpler. They never believed in me enough to show up. And that night, as I listened to the hum of the refrigerators and the faint ticking of the clock, I realized something sharp. I had built something beautiful, and they chose not to see it. So I decided I would no longer beg for their approval, no longer wait for scraps of their attention. Instead, I would make this bakery the very thing they couldn't ignore, and I would do it without ever needing them again. The next morning, I opened early, before the sun had fully risen. Customers trickled in, faces lighting up as they tasted my croissants, muffins, and layered cakes. Word spread quickly in the neighborhood. People whispered that there was finally a bakery worth visiting every morning. Lines began to form, and soon I couldn't keep up with demand. I hired an assistant, then another. Each day I poured my soul into perfecting recipes, writing down new ideas in the little leather notebook I carried everywhere. But every triumph had a shadow, because I kept thinking of how different it would feel if my family had been there that first day, clapping, telling me they were proud. Instead, I got silence. Worse than silence, my sister later texted me a casual, "Hope it went okay," as if I hadn't invited her weeks in advance. My mother never mentioned it at all. And my father? He only called when he needed a favor. Their absence became fuel. Every morning when I woke up at 4 a.m. to knead dough, I told myself, this is for me, not them. Every time I pushed through exhaustion, I thought, they don't get to own a single piece of this. But then came the day that shifted everything. The day my bakery was featured in a local magazine. A glossy spread of my cakes, my face smiling in front of the window. The headline calling me the woman who sweetened the city. I remember holding the magazine in trembling hands, knowing this was my moment. And that's when my phone lit up with a call from my mother. Not a congratulations, not an apology, but a demand cloaked in sweetness. "Vanessa, your cousin's wedding is coming up. We'd love for you to bake the cake." I froze. After all the silence, all the rejection, they suddenly wanted my work to be part of their big event. They wanted to showcase me like a trophy, to say, look, this is our family's bakery. This is our daughter. They hadn't shown up for me, but they wanted me to show up for them. And in that moment, something inside me hardened. I knew exactly what I was going to do, and it wouldn't be what they expected. I told my mother yes, with a calm voice that didn't betray the storm building inside me. I could practically hear the satisfaction in her tone as she said, "Good, I'll tell everyone you're doing it. Make it grand. This is important. She had no idea that I was already planning something very different. For the next few weeks, I poured myself into work as usual, smiling at my customers, serving slices of cake to couples celebrating anniversaries, parents buying birthday treats for their kids, regulars who called my bakery their second home. They saw my dedication, my joy, my strength. But behind the counter, late at night, I worked on something else. I sketched out a cake design in my leather notebook, one I knew would stun anyone who saw it. Multi-tiered, flawless sugar flowers, layers so smooth they'd reflect the light. It would be perfect. But it wouldn't be theirs. On the day of the wedding, I dressed in a simple pastel dress and loaded the cake carefully into my car. Every detail was exquisite. White fondant, delicate gold accents, buttercream that melted on the tongue. When I arrived at the grand hall, I was greeted not by gratitude, but by the sound of my aunt complaining that the flowers didn't match her dress. My cousin barely acknowledged me. My sister gave me a smile so fake it stung worse than silence. And my mother, she paraded me around like I was her latest accomplishment. "This is my daughter," she told the guests. "She owns the bakery. Isn't she talented?" I smiled, but inside I burned. Because none of them had earned the right to claim me or my success. When it was time to cut the cake, the room fell silent in awe. Phones flashed, cameras clicked. My cousin and his bride cut the first slice, and everyone cheered. My mother's eyes sparkled with pride, not for me, but for the image she was crafting of our family. And that's when I stepped forward, microphone in hand. "I'm glad you all enjoyed the cake," I said, my voice steady. "But I want you to know something. Not one person in this family came to the grand opening of my bakery. Not one. When I started this dream, I was alone. When I needed support, I was dismissed. Today you clap and cheer, but you never showed up when it mattered. This cake, it's not for you. It's for me, for the woman who built something out of nothing while her own family turned their backs." Gasps rippled through the crowd. My sister's jaw dropped. My aunt muttered under her breath. My mother's smile froze, cracking like thin glass. I placed the microphone down, picked up my things, and walked out of that hall as whispers chased me. That night, as I locked up my bakery, I felt lighter than I had in years. They wanted to use me for their moment, but I had turned it into mine. And from then on, I decided every success, every milestone, every triumph would be shared only with those who truly valued me. Because family, I realized, isn't who shares your blood. It's who shows up when it counts. After that wedding, the phone calls came flooding in. My sister accused me of humiliating the family in front of everyone. My aunt said I ruined the most important day of my cousin's life. And my mother's voice cracked with that mixture of anger and guilt. Tripping I knew too well. "How could you do this to us? Do you know how embarrassed I felt?" For years, those words would have cut me, but not anymore. This time, I didn't apologize. I didn't cry. I didn't explain. I simply said, "Now you know how it feels when the people who are supposed to love you don't show up." And then I hung up. From that moment on, I stopped waiting for them to change. I built walls, not out of spite, but out of necessity. I threw myself deeper into my bakery, letting it expand into something even I hadn't imagined possible. Within months, we were booked out for weddings, baby showers, corporate events. I was hiring more staff, training apprentices, even consulting with other small business owners. My bakery became more than a dream. It became proof of what resilience looks like when no one believes in you but yourself. And that's when the calls started coming again. Not angry ones, but pleading ones. My sister wanted a cake for her son's birthday. My aunt wanted pastries for her church fundraiser. My father even showed up once, standing awkwardly in the doorway, asking if I could help him with a business contact who loved my desserts. They all wanted a piece of the bakery now that it was something people talked about, now that it carried weight, now that my name was printed in articles and whispered in circles they cared about. But I remembered that empty opening day, standing in a crowded room filled with strangers while my own family stayed home. I remembered the silence, the hollow ache, the truth that had burned itself into me. So every time they reached out, I kept my voice steady and professional, but distant. "I'm booked," I'd say. "Maybe next time." Or sometimes I wouldn't answer at all. And though part of me once would have ached at the thought of shutting them out, now it felt like freedom. Because for the first time, I wasn't chasing after their love or approval. I was choosing myself. My bakery windows glowed at night like a beacon, filled with warmth, laughter, the scent of cinnamon and sugar. Inside, customers smiled, couples shared bites of cake, friends gathered over coffee. It was the family I had always wanted but never had, and I built it with my own 2 hands. And as I stood there, apron dusted with flour, pen in hand, scribbling down another recipe in my leather notebook, I realized the sweetest revenge wasn't in cutting them out. It was in knowing I never needed them to begin with. The more distance I put between myself and my family, the clearer everything became. They had thrived on the idea that I would always be available to them, always bending, always proving myself. But when I stopped answering, when I stopped running to fix their problems or cushion their failures, the silence grew deafening on their end. My mother tried one last tactic, showing up at the bakery unannounced on a Saturday morning. She walked in just as the line was wrapping around the block, my staff hustling to keep trays full and customers happy. She didn't congratulate me. She didn't buy anything. She simply stood there with a strained smile and said, "Your grandmother would have wanted us all together. Don't you think it's time you forgive?" I wiped my hands on my apron, looked her in the eyes, and for the first time in my life, I felt no pull, no guilt, no urge to soften. "Grandma always showed up," I told her plainly. "You didn't. That's the difference." I turned and walked back behind the counter, leaving her standing there as the people who truly supported me filled the space around her. She left without another word, and in that silence, I felt a release so deep it was almost physical. My bakery grew into something larger than I'd ever dared to dream. I expanded into a second location, then a third. Local papers became national features. Food bloggers lined up outside my door. And soon, I was hosting workshops for women who wanted to start their own businesses. And every time someone asked about my story, about the secret behind my success, I told them the truth. That I learned the hard way you can't wait for your family to clap for you. Sometimes you have to clap for yourself first. I didn't erase them from my past, but I no longer carried them into my future. My revenge wasn't loud or cruel. It was steady, undeniable, and sweet as sugar. They missed the moment to stand beside me, and now they had to watch from the outside, pressed up against the glass of a life they once dismissed. And I no longer looked for them in the crowd. I had my people now. The customers who became friends, the staff who became family, the community that never failed to show up. That was all I ever needed. And as I locked the door one night, the smell of freshly baked bread lingering in the air, I whispered to myself the truth I'd finally come to believe. I opened my dream bakery, and even if not a single one of them ever walked through those doors, I was never alone. Years passed, and the sting of their absence dulled into something else. Not forgiveness, not bitterness, but a kind of clarity. I realized my family would never be what I once hoped for, and that was okay. My life became rich in ways I had never imagined. My bakery became a landmark in the city. My recipes passed from hand to hand, my name spoken with warmth by people who had never known me as a daughter, a sister, or a niece, but simply as the woman who brought sweetness into their lives. And still, every so often, a reminder of my family slipped in, usually in the form of whispers from someone who had seen them. My sister, bitter about how her own ventures failed. My aunt, complaining that I was too good for the family now. My father, quiet, older, finally slowing down. But I didn't chase those whispers. I let them drift past me like background noise. Because when you've built something out of the ashes of neglect, you don't run back into the fire. The bakery became my safe haven, my empire, my legacy. The walls I once painted with trembling hands now bore plaques of awards, framed articles, thank you letters from strangers whose lives were touched by the smallest gesture. A cupcake sent to a hospital room. A wedding cake delivered against all odds. A pie baked to honor someone's memory. That was the family I chose. And perhaps the greatest twist of all was this. The more my own blood turned their backs, the more the world opened its arms. I had customers who stayed with me for years, employees who grew with me, a community that carried me further than I ever thought possible. And I learned that sometimes revenge isn't fire or fury. Sometimes it's a quiet, steady refusal to shrink. Sometimes it's living so fully, so loudly, that the silence of those who doubted you becomes their own punishment. And so every time I unlock the door in the morning, hearing the bell chime as the scent of fresh bread escapes into the street, I know one thing for certain. My family's absence on that first day was the greatest gift they ever gave me, because it taught me I didn't need them to become everything I was meant to be. I no longer mark time by holidays or family gatherings because those dates don't hold weight for me anymore. My calendar is full of milestones that matter, anniversaries of when each bakery opened, the day my cookbook hit the shelves, the moment a woman in her 60s hugged me with tears in her eyes and said, "You gave me the courage to start again." Those are my markers now. And yet, one evening, as I was closing up the flagship bakery, I saw them. My mother, my sister, and even my father standing outside across the street. They weren't together, they never moved as one, but each lingered as if pulled there by some invisible thread. My mother's eyes darted toward the glowing windows. My sister's arms were folded tight. My father's shoulders slumped with age. They didn't come inside. They didn't wave. They just stood there, watching from the shadows, staring at the life they never supported but now couldn't ignore. For a moment, I thought I felt something break inside me, a last shred of longing I hadn't realized was still there. But it didn't shatter me, it freed me. Because seeing them like that, standing on the outside of everything I had built, I finally understood the full circle of my story. They had chosen not to be part of the beginning, and in doing so, they had written themselves out of the ending. I turned the key in the door, flicked off the lights, and let the bell chime one last time that night. As I walked home, the cool air carrying the faint scent of sugar and yeast from my own hands, I realized the revenge was never about hurting them. It was about proving to myself that I was enough. And I had done more than prove it. I had lived it. Now every morning when I unlock that door, when the line forms down the block, when laughter fills the tables and the scent of cinnamon and vanilla fills the air, I know one thing with absolute certainty. My family may have missed the grand opening, but they also missed the grandest truth of all, that I never needed them to show up in order to rise. When I look back now, it almost feels like another lifetime. The young woman in a borrowed dress, standing at the bakery doors with trembling hands, scanning the street for familiar faces that never came. I hardly recognize her anymore, because the woman I am today doesn't wait by the door, doesn't beg for claps, doesn't measure her worth by who shows up. My life has filled with so many people who chose me without obligation. The single father who buys muffins every Saturday morning for his kids, the elderly woman who tells me stories of her youth while sipping coffee at the corner table, the college student who got her first job behind my counter and still sends me postcards from her travels. They are my people. They are my proof. And when reporters or interviewers ask about my big break, I don't tell them about magazine spreads or awards. I tell them about that first day, when I cut the ribbon to my dream bakery and realized the crowd of strangers cheering for me mattered more than the family who stayed home. That was the moment I understood that love and support aren't guaranteed by blood. They're earned and they're mutual. My bakery taught me that. Life taught me that. And the sweetest irony, my name became the one people associated with warmth, home, family, celebration, all the things my blood relatives never gave me. They wanted me small. I became big. They wanted me silent. I built a business that made noise across a city. They wanted me dependent. I became untouchable. And sometimes, late at night, when the ovens are off and the city hums quietly outside, I stand alone in the bakery, the air still scented with sugar, and I smile. Because what they saw as my weakness, my dreaming, my stubbornness, my need to create, was the very thing that carried me into a life richer than anything they could imagine. They missed the grand opening, yes. But the truth is, they missed everything after it, too. And that, in the end, is the kind of revenge that doesn't fade. It grows sweeter with every passing day. Sometimes I wonder if they even realized the magnitude of what they walked away from that day. Or if in their minds it was just another small slight, another casual dismissal in a long pattern of never taking me seriously. Maybe they tell themselves they had other plans, or that my bakery wasn't a big deal then. Maybe they've rewritten the memory to make themselves feel better, because the truth that they missed the most important moment of my life is too heavy for them to carry. But I carry it. Not as a wound anymore, but as a reminder. Every time I unlock the bakery door before dawn, I remember standing there alone. Every time a new customer gasps at the first bite of cake, I remember that emptiness. Every time another milestone passes, another expansion, another feature, another award, I remember who wasn't there, and it makes the victory sharper, clearer, sweeter. My bakery has grown beyond what I ever dreamed. I've hosted charity events, supplied desserts for galas, even had celebrities stop by unannounced just to taste what the city whispers about. My name is etched into this place, into every loaf of bread, every pastry box tied with ribbon, every smile across the counter. And through it all, I never once needed their approval. That's the part that still astonishes me when I stop to think about it. I built all of this without the very people I once thought I couldn't live without. Their absence became my fuel, their silence became my motivation, their rejection became the fire that forged me. And though they may still lurk at the edges, watching from the shadows, they will never step fully into this world I created, because I didn't leave room for them here. This bakery, this life, this legacy, it belongs to me and to the people who actually showed up. And in that truth, I have found a peace so deep, even their ghosts can't shake it. The years after that silent grand opening unfolded in ways I could never have imagined. What began as a single bakery, born out of stubbornness and heartbreak, transformed into a name people across the country recognized. I opened more locations, each one carefully chosen, each one carrying the same warmth and care as the first. I traveled to food expos, stood on stages, shared my story, and every time I told it, the room grew quiet. Because it wasn't just about flour and sugar, it was about what happens when you stop waiting for people to clap for you and learn to clap for yourself. I watched young women approach me with tears in their eyes, telling me they finally felt brave enough to chase their own dreams after hearing mine. I mentored new bakers, invested in their talent, gave them what I had once craved so desperately. Someone to say, "I see you. I believe in you. Keep going." And all the while, my family drifted further into the background, still circling, still reaching out when they needed something, but never stepping into the role they abandoned. I no longer burned when they called. I barely even flinched. Their absence no longer hurt. It simply confirmed what I already knew. They had written themselves out of my story. And in that space, I had written something far greater than I ever thought possible. The truth is, I stopped living for revenge a long time ago. Revenge was the spark, yes. The fire that lit inside me when they left me standing at those bakery doors alone. But what grew from that spark was not bitterness. It was power. It was freedom. It was the realization that the best revenge isn't screaming or fighting or even proving them wrong. The best revenge is a life so rich, so full, so undeniable that their absence becomes irrelevant. And that's what I built. So when I walk into my bakery now, when I see the tables full, the windows glowing, the shelves stacked high with everything my heart once only dreamed of, I don't think of who isn't there anymore. I think of who is. I think of the strangers who became family, the community that held me up, the people who never failed to show up. And as the scent of fresh bread wraps around me, I know with unshakable certainty that the grand opening was only the beginning. The real story was everything that came after. Now, as I stand in the quiet of my bakery long after closing, the soft glow of the pendant lights reflecting off polished counters, I can finally breathe in the fullness of everything I've created. The ovens are off, the trays are empty, the last crumbs swept away, but the air is still heavy with the scent of sugar and cinnamon, of dreams baked into reality. I trace my fingers over the wooden table I once sanded with shaking hands, remembering the girl who thought success only mattered if her family saw it. She doesn't exist anymore. In her place is a woman who knows her worth doesn't come from applause, but from the quiet satisfaction of showing up for herself every single day. My family never returned in the way I once wished they would. They still hover at the edges of my life, trying occasionally to stake a claim in something they didn't build, but they no longer hold any power over me. Their absence on that first day has become the defining line of my story. Because it forced me to find strength in solitude, to choose community over obligation, to replace longing with purpose. And that is a gift I wouldn't trade, not even for the applause I once craved. Now, when customers laugh over coffee, when children press their faces to the glass to pick out cupcakes, when someone thanks me for making their celebration sweeter, I know I am surrounded by the kind of family I always needed. The family that chooses you, that shows up, that never doubts your worth. My revenge was never in cutting them down. It was in rising, in thriving, in living a life so rich that their silence became nothing more than background noise. I no longer wait for them to walk through my doors. Because this bakery, this dream, this life, they're already full. And as I turn off the lights and step into the night, the keys jingling softly in my hand, I whisper the truth I've come to carry like armor. They didn't show up when it mattered, but I showed up for myself. And that was more than enough.